You know, I like to go onto YouTube, browse the dark wrong side of it, just to see what some people are saying and thinking. A common one that I see, as well as in my comments, is the Juniper death theory. The theory that all of Juniper will die, as did their counterparts. So I decided to go back into my roots, and instead of trying to get inside the mind of the characters, I've decided to give you a bit more of an informational video about Juniper's deaths. Or at least how their counterparts died. I am still going to theorize as to what could happen, but mainly what you should be looking out for. I am going to skip Pyrrha because she's already dead. So, let's begin, starting with Jean. Jean's character was of course inspired by Joan of Arc. Jean's age is said to be 17, whether pre-time skip or post-time skip, I don't know. Presumably it's pre-time skip. But Joan set out on her journey at the age of 16. Jean may have been introduced from age 17, but we've seen that he's not that great of a warrior when the series began. He, like Joan, could have begun his journey at age 16. But as for the story of Joan, here is the simple version. There was a prophecy in this story, France being restored by a woman, a virgin. The prophecy referred to how the queen claimed that her son, Charles, was an illegitimate child, and thus, the right to the throne had been taken away from him. Because of this, Joan had attracted a group of followers that believed she was the one that the prophecy spoke of. She then cut her hair and dressed like a man and went to war. Throughout her time, she moved forward by her belief, the voice of God as it were. Charles eventually got crowned king, and Joan decided to continue to fight. During one of her missions, she failed and got captured. She is tried and convicted of heresy, and is burnt at the stake. We've begun with Jean, probably the most brutal of all the deaths in Juniper. So, what's the connection we can make with Joan and Jean? First of all, Joan heard voices from God. As of the making of this video, Jean has heard no such thing as far as we know. But it is believed that Jean will hear Pyrrha's voice, as is his inspiration from Joan. Also, another thing about Joan to look out for with Jean was that at the age of 13 was when she really began hearing voices. So it's within the 13s of Jean's life that you should really be trying to make connections to Joan. Jean has also not been prophesized of anything. One of the only other connections we can make is Carden Winchester. What relevance did Henry Beaufort have in Joan's story? Well, not much. He was practically just a throwaway character. The thing that made him different than the rest was that we knew his name. He was there when she died, but he didn't play much of a role. Now, Joan's death was by fire. If Jean is burnt alive, that would be absolutely brutal for a character's death, especially for someone like Jean. Fire is absolutely a thing to look out for when it comes to worrying about Jean's death. Something else that could also potentially happen has to do with Carden. As stated, he was useless in Joan's story, but that doesn't mean he will be useless for Jean's. He already has seemed to have lost his relevance to the story, but perhaps that's not the case. When he was introduced, he seemed as though he was going to play a big part in the series, only to have stopped completely in his tracks. Carden and Jean are binded by that tale. Carden could very well be the one to end Jean's life. Now, Nora. She was of course inspired by Thor. And boy was this one difficult to research, because you see, Thor's death involves a story. The death of Thor and many other gods, but Thor most importantly, was prophesized as Ragnarok. Meaning when you're trying to learn about Thor's relevancy to Ragnarok, I keep getting redirected to the movie. Very unfortunate. You must keep in mind that while Nora may be inspired by Thor, there is a difference between the Thor superhero from Marvel and the Norse mythology of Thor. There are many similarities between the two, but the two are different nonetheless. So back to the events of Ragnarok. Ragnarok is a series of future events, including a great battle foretold. This battle is said to result in the death of many gods, Odin, Loki, and most relevant to this topic, Thor. But in this tale, Thor is met by a serpent by the name of, let's call him Jormungand. In simplest of terms, the two fought in a great battle, that of the gods. Thor managed to kill the serpent, only to moments later die by its poison. Many others died as well in the story, but because Nora is the only one of Team Juniper to be inspired by this story, the tale ended right there for Thor. So, for Nora, her fate could very well be in the hands in that of a snake. Whether it be a Grimm, which we've seen early on, a snake faunus, which is highly likely to exist. It also doesn't even have to be a snake actually. Thor may have fought a snake, but he died of poison. If faunas share the same traits as their animal counterparts, someone who has a poisonous aspect to their type could also be a threat, such as Tyrion. He is already an established villain that is a poisonous faunus type, a scorpion. Tyrion could also be someone to keep an eye on. Also, there's terminology, like that of Ragnarok. Ragnarok was of course a prophecy, essentially. Who else heard prophecies? Joan of Arc. As talked about, Joan heard voices, prophecies. Remnant has no such prophecies that randomly exist in the wild. But if Jean were to hear of an event like that of Ragnarok, if Nora's tale is similar to Thor, Nora will come out of the battle alive, only to die. Possibly in her final moments consoling with Ren. But in the story of Ragnarok, many familiar names died. Loki, Odin, Freya, and so on. If the story holds true when translated to RWBY, it may be the battle that kills off many familiar names. And finally, Ren. So Ren, like Nora, has both a popular iteration of the character, in Ren's case, the Disney movie, and the original base story, the Ballad of Mulan. In this case, the story of Mulan has had many different iterations. It started as a poem, developed into a book, and turned into a play. It was then brought over to Western audience and made into a Disney movie. A lot of these different iterations of Mulan have ended differently. She's lived happily ever after. There have been stories where it's unknown what happened to her. She of course died, being a human and all. And then there are stories that we're talking about, her suicide. But before we go into that, let me give you a brief summary on the story of Mulan for those of you who don't know. In the poem, the Emperor calls upon the army in an emergency to help defend their country from invaders. Mulan's father wanted to help, but ultimately was too old to do so. Mulan then took it upon herself to disguise herself as a man and join the army in his place. The war she takes part in spans over 10 years. She manages to help lead the army to victory. After that, she goes home. Her deed is done, and she takes care of her father. The Emperor himself went over to commend the warrior, where he found out that he was a she. And the story ends there. You might be thinking, where was the death? Well, in the ballad, Mulan didn't die. If you want the version where she did die, here it is. After her time in the war, she returns home. But instead of tending to her father has been long dead, and mother has since been remarried. The man that Mulan's mother had remarried summons Mulan to his palace so she could become his concubine, sex slave in other terms. Instead of dealing with her newfound fate, she, having done enough, wanting only to be with her father, commits suicide. Two very different outcomes when it comes to the tale of Mulan. So, let's apply this to Ren. Ren, as it's been stated in the show, was an orphan. He never knew his parents, and same goes for Nora. However, like Mulan, Ren is fighting in a sort of war. But Ren isn't a leader as Mulan was. But you don't care about their similarities, you want to know about their deaths. Ever since the RWBY community caught wind of all these character deaths, they clung to Mulan's suicide of all of her possible outcomes. That seems to be the most popular amongst the fans. Mulan has died in all iterations, but I guess death by old age isn't much of a popular outcome now, is it? So Mulan killed herself due to not wanting to be a sex slave. Understandable. Since it is very likely that will not happen in RWBY, I'm not going to say that it isn't possible, it's just highly unlikely. What else would cause Ren to kill himself? Well, possibly a very Romeo and Juliet type situation. I don't think that either Ren or Nora are going out alone. It seems to be a bit of a package deal. If one dies, the other goes as well. Ren and Nora have been established to know everything and have gone through everything together. Connected at the soul, in a manner of speaking. If Nora was to fall at the hand of a snake, as previously talked about, Ren could be so distraught that he can't live without her and takes his own life. But that's not to say it's an abrupt suicide. Like Mulan, Ren might feel as though he's done all that he could with his life. He's accomplished so much, and all he wants to do is be with Nora. So, he takes his own life. This Juniper death theory is quite an interesting topic floating around the community. So, what do you think? Do you think that the rest of Juniper will suffer the same fate as Pyrrha? Or do you think their fate is not in that of their stories? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Subscribe if you're interested in more content like this, and I'll see you in the next one.